Okay, so thank you everybody for joining the webinar. We're very pleased to have you guys here. And what I thought I'd do is just tell you a little bit about MCAN. I know some of you folks probably came in via other things. Some of you may have already had contact with us, but so we are a statewide group. We're the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. We're founded in 2000 by a couple folks who were doing local work in their communities, and they were talking to each other, but they realized that a lot of people who are doing very local climate work didn't have sort of that network of folks in other communities. So they decided to start an organization to provide that network for people. We also provide expertise as we are able to help folks like you and town level groups take action on climate change in their communities. We have we have slightly more than 50 chapters at this point. Most of them are a single town or city, but some of them represent multiple towns and cities. And for instance, Sustainable South Shore is 14 towns, 2 of which are actually municipal light plants. So, and we work actually with a lot of advocates at the town and city level who are not part of a chapter, but we like to have a team to work with. And we work both to make community level change and to turn that into state and national level change. So that is what we do. And I thought I would turn it over to Oriana. So Oriana Riley, who you guys probably got the invitation from, has been our point person on our municipal light plant work. Oriana, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, here I am.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're interested at MCAN as a climate change mitigation organization in light plants because we think they're a critical component to fighting climate change on the local and state level in Massachusetts. And even though most muni towns are relatively small towns in comparison to cities like Boston or Springfield, they actually altogether make up a pretty significant portion of the electricity load in the state. And they're also not covered by clean energy laws like the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So that leaves a lot up to chance and the hope that light plant managers will do the right thing and get to 100% renewable fast enough so that we can all meet our collective goals. But fortunately, we think that passionate advocates like you all have a big interest in this, and by pushing your munis at the local level, you can make a big difference with that. Next slide. And so a lot of you on here have probably been to at least one or both of our summits that we had in September and January. We have brought together a volunteer leadership team, and our goals along with them are to move as many munis as possible towards clean energy as fast as possible, as well as connect with all 50 towns this year. And we've had 29 towns engaged so far out of the 50 towns. And if anybody on this call is not part of the Google discussion group yet and would like to be, where people kind of share ideas, ask questions, whether it's technical or people related, let me know at the end of this. There's my email, or you might already have my email, and just send me a request. Thanks.
Thanks, Ariana. So tonight we have a couple of great speakers for you guys. We've got 4 folks. We're going to start out with Cammy Peterson, who's from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. She's the Clean Energy Director there. And then we've got Rick from the Princeton Light Board, Sarah from the Belmont Light Board, and Roger from the Hingham Light Board. We're also going to save a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. And what we'll do is that you guys can put the questions into the chat. So again, that's that sort of little speech bubble up on the toolbar. And we'll save them for the end, so you can put them in as they come to you. We'll save them for the end and make sure that the appropriate person is able to answer them. So we will also, as I said, we'll record the webinar. We'll send you the link, and we will put it up on our website. And our goals for tonight are to help you guys understand better what light plants do and how light boards interact with the light plants, and to understand why you might want to join a light board. There are probably several of you on the line who are already light board members. And for those of you who aren't, what you might do if you were to join a light board. And Oriana mentioned this, but we've got our next Light Plant Summit, which is going to be on June 23rd in Concord. So we would love to have everybody join us for that. It's going to be another really good conversation and a good time for folks to get together and talk to each other. So Cammy, I want to go ahead and turn this over to you. Have you been able to unmute yourself?
Let me know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. As Carol said, I am Cammy Peterson. I have met some of you all before. I'm the Director of Clean Energy for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. And I'm also, with a different hat on, a board member of MCAN. So happy to be here in both capacities. I figured I'd take just a quick moment, much less than a minute probably, to just ground you in who we are, so you know from whence I come in sharing this information. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with us, we are the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. It's 101 cities and towns that we serve. You can see it on this map. We were created by the legislature in 1963. We're a mission-based public agency. We've grown in the past year to now over 80 employees. I think we're over 85, coming in close to 90 at times, with a wide range of planning expertise. Not just the clean energy department, but environment and public health and land use and transportation and economic development and housing and data services and homeland security and more than you can probably even envision right now are things that we touch in different ways, and all from a smart growth and sustainability point of view. Next slide, please. And just a little bit more foundation in what we do in the Clean Energy Department, and I'm not going to talk through all of these, and you can go to our website to learn more, but just to give you a little bit, again, of an orientation and the work that we do with cities and towns on clean energy. One of the highlights here is we've kicked off a lot of net zero planning over the last year. There's a great web page or web pages on our site now committed to that and are continuing to build those resources. Do a lot of TA, a lot of collective procurements for cities and towns in a range of climate mitigation and clean energy and climate resiliency ways. And have done work to help plug communities into utility programs, have brought Muni communities and investor-owned IOU communities into our procurements and have done a lot of work on both sides. Next slide, please. And also in 2016 released a white paper dedicated to municipal light plant communities. And there were a number of reasons for this. So we were driven in part because we knew, those of you who are on light boards or in Muni communities know a lot more about how a Muni functions. But as you can see here, and as many of you know, Munis serve all are part of 50 communities. There's 41 throughout the state, but there's a lot of communities then, around 300 that are not Muni communities. And there's a lot of just lack of knowledge and awareness of how Munis function and the role that they play. So we wanted to kind of address that issue. But we also really wanted to spotlight some of the good work that Munis were doing on clean energy and really use that as an angle to hopefully prompt even more good work and expansive kind of work on clean energy initiatives within Muni communities and at Muni light boards. As you've heard me say tonight, I've referred to them as Munis. You might also hear them referred to as MLPs or municipal utilities. But Munis in general are community-owned as opposed to private investor-owned utilities. And as Oriana touched on before, they're exempt from many of the state's regulatory requirements. They were established back with this chapter 370 back in 1891, and since then 41 have come into being. Most of those really within that early time period after they were first established and through the beginning of the 20th century. It's been really close to 100 years since most of these have been established. And so many of them, nearly all of the 41 really happened in those first several decades. They are organized in a lot of cases by these membership organizations that I've listed here. Not all are necessarily part of all of these, but most of them, or all three of them, have a large number of members. For example, ENE has about 24 of the 41 munis as part of their membership, and they're one venue for an association that kind of administers a number of energy efficiency and other energy programs for municipal light plant communities or for the munis. And that's one of the vehicles that's been somewhat positive in getting some programs out on clean energy in those munis. There's certainly a lot of other things that we would advocate for that munis could do in this space, and I think a lot of you have learned about at the summits that MCAN has had, a lot of examples of that and ways to do it, and you'll hear more throughout the rest of this webinar. But so those associations are kind of good to know about in terms of how a lot of the programs are administered. Just to touch on another point here before the next slide, one of the things that munis really take pride in is their ability to keep prices low. One of the ways they do that is the small scale of their service areas. Many times it's one community that's served by the Muni. At most it's something like 4 with the Reading Municipal Light Department. So it's a very small scale, and a small jurisdiction. It allows for targeted customized service to a small kind of finite region. It allows them to provide distribution and billing services exclusively to their customers. They don't have to make a profit for their investors. So that's some of the ways and some of the main ways that they're able to keep prices low. They purchase power off the wholesale market and just provide it directly to their customers without a lot of the marketing and other things that IOUs have to do in order to make revenue. But also, as Oriana mentioned, and we'll get into more, they are not beholden to the laws that mandate different kind of clean energy and climate requirements here in Massachusetts. So Oriana mentioned the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard. This is a mandatory requirement for all investor-owned utilities within the state. It began as 1% in 2003. It's grown to now 13% in 2018. We've worked with a number of communities on green municipal aggregation, which allows them to even require competitive suppliers for their residents and small businesses, even more renewables as part of that supply, generally or more. So communities now with 18% or more of their electricity supply coming from renewable sources. Our communities are not required to do that, and many of them have not. Next slide. Here's just a map and a list of all communities. Not something for you to read through here, but just again make that point of together in aggregate. These communities and these munis make up a lot of the state. As Oriana said too, it's around 13% of electricity. So, it is impactful of what these utilities can do and how they can impact the state and the state's climate goals. So just one other or two other quick things that I'll touch on before I turn it over to our other fantastic speakers tonight. It's just that, because the munis don't contribute to the different funds in the state, they don't collect a system benefit charge, they don't pay into the Renewable Energy Trust Fund that's administered by the Mass Clean Energy Center. Those communities are generally not able to take advantage of the clean energy programs run in the state. The only way that muni communities, and several here on the phone, have become green communities, for instance, is either by paying into that trust, which only a small handful have done, or in finding some investor-owned utility customers in their jurisdictions, in which case then they're able to participate in that program. That kind of loophole, even though it's a public and totally legitimate loophole, does not even apply in a lot of other cases. So most like solarized programs, the MCAN and other programs like that, muni communities are not able to participate in by and large. Some have gone forward in doing positive things on their own. For one example, Berkshire Wind Power Cooperative Corporation, which is comprised of MWEC and 14 member munis, owns and operates a 15-megawatt wind farm. Really was intended to be responsive to customer interest in renewable energy. So those of you who live in muni communities can really move your munis more and more toward this. And with that, I'll end my remarks. If you can go to that last slide, you'll see my contact information. I unfortunately cannot stick around for the remainder of the webinar, so won't be on for the Q&A, but please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Just the next slide, Carol, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think your information got moved to the end, but we'll make sure that folks know how to contact you.
Okay, sounds great. And thank you again, you guys, MCAN and others for having me on tonight, and look forward to continuing this discussion.
Great. Thanks, Cammy.
Hey, so this is Rick Riss. I am a light commissioner in the town of Princeton. We run a light department called Princeton Municipal Light Department. We are one of the smaller of the 41 munis. We have about 1,000 households and maybe a population of 3,500. We're a very rural town. We have virtually no industry in our town. We have a few commercial customers, so we're pretty much a large number of residential users. So we have lots of telephone poles and trees. We have residents that tend to commute to and from our town. Our peak load generally is relatively late in the day. We currently are buying the bulk of our power from Next Era Energy. We have in the past purchased from MWIC. We also have kind of a very interesting story in history that we have two 1.5 megawatt wind turbines. They have the equivalent generating capacity equal to about 25% of our town's total power usage. Interestingly, however, we do not purchase any of the power from our own wind turbines or use any of that power, at least financially, in our town. We sell 100% of that power outside of our town, about 7.5%, I think, to the town of West Boylston, another 7.5% to Sterling, and the remaining 85% we sell on the real-time market, coordinated through MWIC. As a result, our green portfolio is pretty much dependent on the portfolio of Next Era Energy. I also mentioned that we have an activity in town to finally get broadband in our town, and that basically means that there was a large number of poles that were being replaced in town, and a lot of work going on to replace poles that are insufficient and move wires up to keep the 40-inch spacing required between the fiber optic cables and the electric power distribution in our town. So that kind of just gives you a snapshot, but I'll back up a little bit on our wind turbines, just to give you an interesting background there. We actually started out with 8 wind turbines in 1984. They were 40 megawatt units. At that time, the town had the option of buying into Seabrook, and the town basically rose up and ran Seabrook more or less out of town and said, we are not going to buy nuclear power. And as a result of that, they decided that, well, we're going to generate some of our own power, and so we were a very early adopter of wind power in our town. And probably have a little more of that later. Next slide. So in our light department, we have 3 elected commissioners. A new commissioner is elected each year for a 3-year term. I actually moved into the town a year ago in January and ran for commissioner and won commissioner in May. I thought there was a lot of things I could do to help our town. I had some background with wind turbines, and we have some difficulties with our wind turbines. We paid a lot of money for them. Financially, they haven't been that great of an investment for us. Technically, they're working okay. So I thought that the direction of our current light board and light department was going in a little bit different direction, and so I hope to by running there, I could provide some technical assistance and maybe help to steer us in a more favorable, probably greener direction. There were a lot of controversial issues about net metering and net metering policies. Our current policy in our town is we have zero compensation for any solar energy, that excess solar energy is put to the grid. We allow you to connect to our grid with a solar system. We don't have any limitations on batteries, but we have a very regressive policy that has discouraged solar energy in our town. We also have some of the highest rates in all of the state, nearly 25 cents a kilowatt hour. A part of that is due to paying down the debt of our wind turbines. That's only maybe 4 cents. The bulk of it, though, is mostly because we have so many poles to maintain and so few high-use customers. All right, so the next slide. So that's kind of the structure of our light board. As I mentioned, the selectmen are completely uninvolved in here. This is purely the light board runs our light department, completely independent. Some towns have more involvement with their select boards. So I just wanted to mention briefly for those who didn't know what commissioners do. All right, we basically meet once a month for a few hours. We review the budgets. We review the status of our distribution network. Any important maintenance items. There always seems to be certain things going on, whether it's northeastern storms or broken equipment or new builders trying to power up new houses or the various types of things. We obviously vote on proposals and policies. Of course, as you get elected as a commissioner, you have to become aware of the open meeting rules and the rules of ethics. Open meeting rules are very strict. Basically, I feel that I can't even email any of the other commissioners. We can only talk about commissioner business during the meetings and so forth. There's no possibility then to have outside discussions between two commissioners. So what else do? We set all the policies and goals for our light department. We buy the power for the town or procure it. We enter into power purchase agreements with our suppliers. We obviously build and maintain our own distribution system. So we decide, which sections of poles and, of wiring might need to be upgraded, what voltage level to run at, how many transformers, where to put them. In our case, we are selling our wind power on the real-time market. We are also selling our RECs to our supplier at the moment, NextEra Energy. Some of those things could be changed. We could purchase those RECs and retire them. We may be able to find some ways of moving that wind power into our town. There are some technical and logistical financial issues associated with doing that. We could establish a more proactive net metering and interconnect policy, than the one we have. That's something that I'm pushing for and in fact advocated about demonstrating that the cost of net metering is actually a net profit in our current method and a little bit unfair to the solar suppliers in our town. So we have to obviously learn and honor all the legal, administrative, technical rules, the operation of electric power, in the grid and, NERC and FERC and ISO New England and all of the entities on there can get a little bit complicated. We also, though, have to interact with our own residents and our town boards and other commissioners. We have an environmental action committee who has recommended more solar in our town that maybe could be involved in doing more things with smart city type of activities. Bringing in a fiber optic network now into our town opens up a few things that we can also do. We will be running probably fiber to our wind turbines to have a better data acquisition system. We could put a lot of our data measurements on our wind turbines and our performance of our own system, on a web page. So we, as a commissioner, you basically hire the light department manager. You determine his raise. You basically manage the business. We set the rates, watch expenses. We handle reliability and make all of those decisions. There's quite a bit of freedom there. All right, next slide. So in 2008, we had the famous ice storm. We lost power for 12 days. Kind of as a result of that storm, we we convinced a lot of homeowners that had trees in their yard that we should be able to cut their trees down to keep our reliability of our grid higher. And so we have a tree trimming program where we trim a quarter of the town every year. We've made it through the last 3 northeastern storms with 0 outages, no flickers at all. Very nice. And so we definitely, reliability is exceedingly important. When we lose power, customers will complain, even more than raising the price. All right. Next slide. I just wanted to show you kind of, we were a very early adopter for wind power. Back in '84, we put these 4 wind turbines, these 8 40-megawatt wind turbines up. We currently have 2 1.5 megawatt Furlander units. They are kind of a German design, but on the one hand, Furlander went out of business. The contractor that put them in went out of business. But we have actually plenty of spare parts, and it turns out that it's actually not a particular problem to maintain wind turbines, even when that have such common parts. That's a Bachmann control system, the blade manufacturers, the gearboxes, pretty much anything that breaks, we would be able to fix it. And so we are trying to keep our capacity factor as high as possible, make as much power, but we're also trying to improve some of our financial performance of our wind turbines. That's one of our big issues in our town. Next slide. All right, so just kind of, I think the interesting possibility, if you wanted to be more involved in your light commissioner, you can make tremendous impact on how green your town is. You could in principle buy coal power or dirty power. You could buy nuclear power. You could buy wind power. You could adjust and determine what your score is on a green report card. You could try to get to 100% renewables by a particular date. Our town is also has no natural gas in our town, and so our town is heated approximately 90% of the households heat with oil and another 3 or 4% heat with propane. We would love to see those people convert to the low temperature mini split heat pumps. We've got some programs there. We are part of the HELPS program. We do give free energy audits. We will finance your heat pump system. We will give you rebates on Energy Star appliances. So we did sign up through programs like that with MWIC. So in fact, they have been particularly successful. Our load has dropped 1.2% every year for the last 5 years. On the one hand, that's good for our town, but still it's again a financial issue that we need to be able to sell more power. So we need more people switching from fossil fuel to electric supply for heating their house and hot water. We would certainly like to see electric charging stations, a lot of other infrastructure occur in town. We'd like to be more involved with demand response for those people that do put in battery systems or hot water heaters that might be electric hot water heaters that might be switchable or that could be used to reduce our demand capacity charges. We pay about 6 cents a kilowatt for energy. We pay about 3% to 4% almost for distribution, and they're called capacity and transmission. And that capacity and transmission costs can be reduced if your peak load for the 1 hour of 3 or 4 months of a year is kept low. And so it's very important during those peak loads that occur, the peak load that occurs on the ISO distribution system, at that moment, if your town is using a low power rate, and that's a big justification, for example, of the Stirling battery. So anyway, options for the future, smart meters, EVs, charging station, we already well underway with energy audits, electric home heat. I show a picture here. This is actually a picture of my own house with putting solar panels on this past December. So we have try to encourage high efficiency houses. Hopefully more people can get to net zero power. I did also produce a brief history of the Princeton wind turbines, and I put a copy of that on my own website under this page. Probably could use an update, but it's 4 or 5 years old, but still it gives you kind of the history of the whole what I call it, forward-thinking part of the town before I even moved to town, of people that were very interested to pursue a very renewable energy future. So that's all for me.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
Great.
All right. Sarah, are you there?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Fabulous. We can. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. And I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Sarah Jackson, and I live in the town of Belmont. We call ourselves the Town of Homes. We're a western suburb of sort of the Boston-Cambridge area. Have about 26,000 people. Most of the town is pretty residential. We have a little bit of commercial development. We have a large psychiatric hospital, but otherwise it is a town of homes. It's a lot of people who commute into the city to work. And we have our Municipal Light Plant, which if you switch to the next slide, I have here. So our Muni is called Belmont Light. And unlike Princeton, we're governed by a light board, which is our elected selectmen. I think it's an interesting difference because you have a group of people who are elected to govern the town and who don't necessarily have any experience and aren't expected to have any experience with operating a utility. So the light board, which is our selectmen, also appoints a 7-member advisory committee. And currently that committee is the Light Board Advisory Committee, and I sit on that committee. So different from Rick, I'm actually an advisory committee as opposed to a light board member. Our Light Board Advisory Committee has requirements that the people who are appointed by the selectmen have to have expertise in a number of relevant areas when it comes to running the community utility, community-owned utility. I will say that there's some really interesting history in Belmont that I think illustrates a lot of the ways in which people like all of you on the phone could get involved and could have an influence on the mix of resources that your utility uses and other policies that are adopted by your light board. And I think there's probably some differences in the way different munis are governed, but perhaps in a muni that's governed the way Belmont is, it might be a little bit easier to make those changes because of how political in nature the governing board actually is. I will say I am very new to Belmont. I have only lived here for 3 years, and I came in after a lot of legwork was done by some really hardworking residents in town who made a lot of changes happen. And I'm going to do my best to cover what those changes were and to try to explain their significance. And there may be some folks on the phone who know more than me about this history and could add on or correct me if I get anything wrong. But if you go to the next slide, I'll start walking us through some of this exciting history of our Belmont Advisory Committee. So back in 2006, the selectmen created what was called the Municipal Light Advisory Board, and that was called MLAB for short. And back then it was recognized that the selectmen didn't have the expertise to manage the utility and wanted to get help from folks in town. There's a lot of expertise in this town. We're really close to all the universities, so we have a lot of people who do good work on this stuff living in town. So they put together this MLab to help essentially govern that utility. And I think the idea, at least by some people, was that this board might eventually become a board similar to what you have in Princeton, which is a totally separate and independent board of experts who help run the utility. I think that was the initial plan. But over the years, that advisory board was staffed by people with particular perspectives on different ways of running the light board, and in 2014 kind of culminated in what I'll call an anti-solar policy being adopted I'm sure there are folks out there who might take issue with me saying that, but this was a policy that was adopted that was fairly punitive towards solar. It had been, there had been a fairly generous policy, I believe, in town. This changed it significantly to put fees onto solar owners and also to significantly reduce the money that would be paid back through net metering. So essentially, it really, really stifled solar development in town. And a lot of folks in town who wanted to put solar on their roofs were hearing either from their solar developer when they called or just knew from being involved that this was a bad policy for solar. And so a lot of people took action and got involved. And in 2015, they voted out one of the chair of the selectmen. So one of the three selectmen was voted out, essentially under pressure over this policy. There was a lot of blowback. The remaining selectmen, I think, got pretty sensitive and wanted to try to make amends with the town. The town also, I think at this time the MLab was suspended because it stopped being active, and some of the folks who were on that board left the town government over this. And ultimately, in that same year, a new solar policy that was a lot better was adopted. So I think this is great and shows how powerful getting involved can be in a town and how much access you have as a townsperson who is really one of the owners of your utility. So I'll just quickly get to the end, and that is that following all of this big sea change, they set up a new Light Board Advisory Committee. This committee was designed to be more separate. It was designed to specifically, we advise the Light Board, or as I said earlier, the selectmen, in how to manage the town. So the Light Board is responsible for doing most of those things that Rick was telling us about, but they really defer to the general manager of our utility. And the Light Board, on which I sit with 6 other great people, we all advise on different policy decisions. And I'll say that right now, from where I sit, it feels like a lot of progress has been made. We now have one of the most successful solar programs in the state, as well as one of the most aggressive electric vehicle programs. I think Belmont is still #1 for electric vehicle adoption, and that is supported through several committees in the town and through our Light Board. So I could go into a whole bunch of other fun things we've been doing, but I think we're running a little short on time, so I will wait for questions and pass it on to Roger.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Roger, are you unmuted?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
All right. Yeah. Perfect.
Great. Well, it's great to be with all of you, and I appreciate all the other speakers providing interesting and complementary background information on the overall system of municipal utilities here in Massachusetts and what folks have done in Princeton and Belmont. And I was involved with the Belmont citizens groups that were objecting to the policies of the old Belmont Advisory Committee that was stifling the development of renewable energy and solar in particular, largely, due to the arguments of one energy advisor they had on, a citizen of Belmont they had on the committee who was biased against distributed local solar, and he thought it was too expensive, and so they were, they basically hostile to it prior to the real action that's taken place over the last several years, and it was great to see that. I'm Roger Freeman. I'm on the Light Board for the town of Hingham. I'm an energy developer, a solar power developer, and an energy lawyer. I've been practicing and advising and developing projects in alternative energy for the last 20 years or so. I got interested in the Hingham Light Board originally back around 2010, 2011, when I learned how, each of these municipal utilities were their own vertically integrated power companies. And it was amazing to me that each of these towns had the power, and the residents had the power to control their energy future. So I decided to run for office originally 2012, and I lost. And then I ran again, I think, in 2014, and I lost. And then I ran again in 2015 because I'm a glutton for punishment, and I won. And the lesson there is if you keep at it and look for an opportunity. The election I won was when a seat came open because one of the other commissioners left the board. The reality is, in these small town elections, it's very difficult to unseat an incumbent who is not doing a terrible job. And in fact, the light departments in Massachusetts, the munis, they do an excellent job of their primary mission of keeping the lights on, service quality high, and rates relatively reasonable. And so when I was elected in 2015, it was, because it was my third time running and I ran a campaign that was really focused on renewable energy and trying to do more to bring Hingham Light effectively into the future and prepare for the energy system of the 21st century. And one of the big issues for us, excuse me, was net metering. And these light companies, the municipal light departments, there's a whole, I'll call it a world, of municipal light departments, and there's a network of people that work in this area and within the management. You've heard reference to MWEC and Energy New England. Those organizations really serve as the buying entities that buy the energy for and service the light department needs. And we're actually a part owner, a member of the co-op for Energy New England, and they generally do a good job. But in the past, the municipal light departments have had a fairly, I would say ambivalent, if not hostile reaction to new renewable energy and new ways of doing things that deviate from the traditional vertically integrated model for utility operations. And so if you want to make change, you really need to go where the power is. And for the light companies, that's on the light board. And we have 3 commissioners, and the decisions that the commissioners make really run the company on behalf of the citizens. And so, I've been an advocate for pushing Hingham to become more green. The slide you're looking at now is our current power supply. You can see the sources where it comes from. The green slice is about 14% of our supply comes from renewable energy sources. Just in the past year, we've gone through a fairly significant debate and internal discussion about how we characterize that. As you may know, if you buy renewable energy, but you sell the associated RECs, the renewable energy certificates that represent the renewable attributes of that power, if you sell those, then you can't really claim that energy to be renewable. So we've tried to make sure that we have either retaining and retiring RECs from those projects that you see, or to the extent that we're selling them, we decided to replace those by purchasing other RECs. And we could get into a long discussion about strategies for achieving carbon neutrality or renewable energy. This past year, I was able to convince the board for Hingham to go 100% carbon free. And what we decided to do, if you could skip back to that prior slide, you'll note that we get 25% of our power from Seabrook and another 3.5%, 4% from Millstone. These are nuclear power facilities, and so that energy is carbon free. And you can object to nuclear for a number of reasons, and I think people that are environmentally sensitive and aware can have honest debates about whether nuclear is a viable option reducing the carbon. My opinion is we need to get carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to generate as little energy from fossil fuels as possible. And for that reason, the fact that we have a 25% share of our power comes from nuclear, I'm not concerned about that as I am concerned about reducing the carbon footprint. So we did vote to go 100% carbon free, and what that means is we're buying RECs to cover the emissions of the yellow parts of that chart that are coming from fossil fuel supplies. And so we can make the claim that we're going 100% carbon free, and we're proud of that. But it's a complicated issue, and there's different types of RECs. And if anyone's interested, I could go on for hours about it. My business right now is advising large corporations on how to go 100% renewable purchasing RECs and the type of RECs that are available in the market and which claims are more legitimate. But the bottom line, from my perspective, is if you have your institution and town making a strong statement in favor of going carbon free, then it's up to the light board to figure out the best way to get there and to get into the details. And any citizens that want to be involved can be. Our meetings are open to the public, and I encourage you, even if you're not thinking of running, to start paying attention to what your Muni is doing. And I would also encourage anyone here to run for the light board and get a seat on the board and a vote at the table, because that's what really makes the decision. Other things that we're doing in terms of renewable energy and alternative energy is we're trying to move a solar project on our local landfill. There's actually a meeting tonight to consider an agreement. We've also replaced all our street lights with LED lights, and we've recently put advanced meters on out into the system so that we can have more control and understanding for the energy use of the citizens. And these meters have the capability to be made smart, so that as we move forward and look to implement more dynamic programs involving load reduction, demand response, electric vehicles, these things will require a smart utility that's able to communicate with each of its users and send signals to turn off load or have a more accurate measurement of when you're using energy for time of use rates and those sorts of things. I'm going to stop now and be happy to answer any questions, but I'll just summarize by saying it's really important that the people in the communities in municipal energy towns take an active role in determining their energy future. And overall, we're a very healthy company, and we can afford to do creative things. And so it's really the will of the people voting in favor of that will make it happen. And so, we were able to convince our town to go carbon free, and we're going to keep moving forward with that. I know the town of Concord, at town meeting, basically voted unanimously to go carbon free by buying RECs. And so it's happening. Belmont's doing great things, and we need to see more of it. And forums like this, where people are getting together and sharing ideas and experiences, I think are a great thing. So I'm happy to open the discussion at this point to questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. So I will just say for folks, this is Carol from MCAN. One of the things that MAPC can help communities do is switch to LED streetlights. So I don't know whether that was something that Hingham worked with MAPC on, but we will get you guys Cammy's contact information, and we can, and if anybody wants to do that in your community, we encourage you to get in touch with them. So Roger, the first question is for you, and it is, what types of RECs is Hingham buying to have your 100% carbon-free 2017?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and we're buying Class 2 RECs, which are from existing assets here in New England. I had to convince the board, the other two members of the board, to do this, and it was not an easy task to get them on board. And so for those who know, there's different types of RECs depending on where they're created, when they're created, and pursuant to what regulatory environment they're operating in. And so the RECs that we're buying, I believe, are going to be Class 2 RECs. They're not Class 1 RECs. They're not S RECs. And they're not, what I think is most important here, they're not additional RECs, meaning they're not RECs coming from new renewable energy power projects. And so while we can make the claim to being carbon free, I'll be the first one to say there's more that we can do here. And from my perspective, this statement is it's a strong one, but it's in some ways a symbolic one, because there's an oversupply of existing RECs in the market, and in some ways, when you buy them, you're pulling on a rope that's got a lot of slack in it. And so until you get all the slack up, our buying these RECs, they legitimately represent carbon-free energy going into the environment, but they don't represent new renewable energy going in. And so we recognize that, and we'll have to, and it's a work in progress.
Yeah, that's fair. Rick, did we lose you already? Did you have to go to the commuter rail? Because there's a question for you about the Princeton Light Department. All right. So somebody asked about whether PMLD could not sell their RECs, and we'll go ahead and get an answer and get that back to you guys as part of that Google group that we mentioned before. So somebody had asked a question that I'm not sure that I understand, which they asked what are the pros and cons to the light boards and how they are elected or chosen. If you could maybe try to, I feel like maybe I don't understand the question, and if you could just restate it maybe a little bit differently in the chat, that would be great. Yeah.
Carol, I think I can answer that. So,
okay.
The two basic structures for the light boards that I'm aware of, you have one like, the majority I believe are like Hingham, where the light board is independent and the light company is independent from the town. And so we have a 3-member board, and our company is totally separate from the town operations. And so we're part of the town, but we're really not part of the town government. And so we operate independently from the town. We have a great working relationship with the town, but we're separate from them. Belmont, the municipal utility, is within the town government, and that's why the selectmen are the light board members. And in many of the towns where it's part of the town government, the selectmen are the designated light board, light commission members. There may be some towns where the light plant is part of the town government, but the light board commissioners are separate. But I'm not aware of them. So, in my opinion, having a separate light company is preferable because it really isolates the operations of the utility outside of the other political and operations of the town, and so it's a cleaner relationship between our company and the residents, and you have direct board members, and we're all the board members in Hingham have experience in the energy business, and we're really focused on that 100%, delivering high quality service, low rates, and also some progress in terms of renewable energy, alternative energy.
And I know that Sarah is going to say something about RECs, but I just want to say that folks bring a lot of different experiences to light boards. You don't have to have experience in the energy world to be a light board member. So don't, folks on the phone, please don't start getting intimidated and feel like you can't do it. Sarah, you had something that you wanted to add about the REC question.
I did, but just on on this question about the pros and cons, I would say a flip side to what Roger was saying is that it feels almost like in a place like Belmont you can exert more political pressure on your town government to get things changed, whereas if you have your separate board, it might be you know, they're seen as experts. They're the ones who know, and it might be a little bit harder. And, you know, Roger, you have more experience in this, so you can tell me if you don't see this happening. But it seems like it could be a little bit harder to make changes if you have a more entrenched board of experts as opposed to, you know, more politically motivated board.
I'll say this, a couple things, and of course these are my opinions, and there's different ways to look at all these issues and think about them. But in my opinion, an elected light board, you're really focused in on one issue. You're focused in on the light company, and so if you get an interested group of citizens focused on that issue, you know, because you could run, you know, with the Board of Selectmen trying to get an energy expert, but he's also got to worry about the schools, he's got to worry about the police department, the fire department, all the town operations, and so there it's a broader scope of issues that people are voting on. With the light board, they're voting on one issue. You know, what's going to be the shape of the light company and the light board. And with respect to the other comment about the composition of the board, absolutely not necessary for you to go in as an expert, and you know, you can learn a lot by participating and getting involved in these issues. And they're not rocket science. That having been said, you know, the general manager is, you know, he's an expert and he's working with experts, and if you don't sort of know how the business works, it's easy to kind of get bamboozled a little bit. And so, you know, at the state level, it's my opinion that what you see at the state level is you have the very large incumbent utilities, you know, dominating the DPU. And so those are even supposed to be, you know, they're supposed to be experts, but you still have people with, you know, 20-year track records running these companies explaining to you why it has to be one way or the other, and they have a huge, you know, amount of ammunition in terms of, you know, some of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of transmission and the FERC and the independent system operator and the DPU and all the regulations. So it's complicated stuff, and it's good to know what you're talking about. So you can learn about it, certainly, but you have to dive in and want to.
Yeah, and I didn't join. I mean, I have a background in energy and environmental policy, but really no background in local government. And so I've gotten involved through sort of appeals from neighbors who knew I had some experience, but it's been really new for me, and it's been a great experience so far. And I will say, to get back to the question about the RECs, Belmont is an interesting case study, and it was actually one of the issues that drove me to want to be involved with the Light Board was, you know, Cammy and Oriana both told us at the beginning how munis are not subject to state laws about renewable energy purchasing or other clean energy mandates, and so essentially don't have to meet any particular goals. Your town can set its own goals, and Belmont has a climate action plan that says we want so much renewable energy. But when you sell your RECs, as Roger said, you kind of give up your right, or you should be giving up your right to claim that you have renewable energy. But munis all across the state were double dipping essentially by saying we buy all this renewable energy. The pie chart that you saw from Roger, there's a similar one for Belmont that shows the makeup of renewable energy in our town. And, you know, we actually got that site taken down last year. A lot of concerned citizens said this doesn't seem right. Can we make it more clear what's going on? And so just this year, we've actually started retiring the RECs rather than selling them, which means we can now wholeheartedly say that we have some renewable energy in town. And I think it's really interesting because up in Vermont, there was a Federal Trade Commission. It wasn't a ruling. There was no actual law-breaking found, but there was the FTC expressed concern that claiming you had renewable power while selling your RECs, or you know, some equivalent situation up there, was essentially deceptive, and that could lead to serious problems and misleading the public. And so I think they took that seriously in Belmont, and we've made some changes, and it's been really cool to see it evolve. So we've now been retiring certain recs, and I think the new website, if you go to, I should have included it as a slide, but the new website at Belmont Light, if you click on the portfolio, it'll tell you what the mix is.
That's great.
Yeah, I can do that.
I was going to say, if you send that to Oriana and I, we can make sure that it goes out with the materials from this. And
Sure.
Somebody asked also about the MAPC white paper. We'll also send that out to you guys after this. And I think what we should probably do is maybe answer questions for another 5 minutes. I've got one that I want you light board commissioners to answer. Just quickly, somebody asked if MWEC was on board with renewables, and I wanted to let folks know that Oriana and I actually sat down with them, and what they told us was that they are, as somebody put in the chat, a member-driven organization, and if their members are asking for it, if their member munis are asking for it, they will absolutely make sure that that's a focus of what they do. So they are not hearing loud and clear quite yet that that's something that people want. So that's another reason for everybody who's on the phone to get involved and help move things forward. So there was a question for you light board folks, that is, what is the biggest challenge that you've faced in moving to renewable energy, both for the light plant itself and for the light board? Sarah, do you want to take a whack at that?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So, again, I'm pretty new, so I don't have all the history. I would say what I see just in meetings and what I hear from folks is that, people worry about it causing rates to go up. Belmont happens to have the first or second highest rates of all the munis in the whole state, so it's not a great position to be in when you're then saying things that people suggest will raise rates, so that can lead to resistance, whether those claims are true or not. But I think that's sort of the main thing. The main thing, there's, the RECs issue is certainly confusing. I mean, I think, Roger, you said that having to educate folks on what RECs are and what they mean and why, if you sell them, you can't then say you have renewable energy. That's tough. It's a hard case to make, I think, when it's such a technical question. So, it comes down to an economic argument for a lot of people saying, well, if we sell the RECs, we don't get as much benefit. So that's what I hear a lot of.
Yep. Roger, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think education of the board and education of the manager. These guys are busy. They've got a lot on their plates, and they're coming in many circumstances from kind of an old school perspective, and some of the board members are coming from a very old school perspective, and cost is a driving issue, and that's always been one of the prime two missions of many of the light boards is to keep costs low as possible, and it's a fairly conservative organization as well. Overall, when I mean organizations, the whole family of municipal utilities, utility industry in general is conservative, and then municipal utilities are conservative, and so you have that bias at work sometimes. I'll give one example. I went to a meeting a couple of years ago of the New England Association of Municipal Utilities, and one of their speakers that they brought on was a full-on climate denier, Heritage Heartland Institute, guy. And it's very frustrating when you're going up against these, I'll call them anachronistic, antiquated mentalities and perspectives. And that can, by the way, that can go to the consultants and their perspectives. And so there have been times over the course of the last several years where I'll ask a question, and the answer that comes back will be slanted and framed in a way that, because I've got a lot of experience in this area, I can spot it and point it out. But that's not always easy to do. So you have to be aware of the implicit biases in the questions that are asked of the consultants when the manager goes out and asks them to prepare a report, you know, what that report comes back saying is often a function of the question and how it was asked, and then you know, so you have to watch carefully about the information that is used as a basis and provided to the board to make decisions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. It's 8:10, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm sure people could stay on, and we've got a couple more questions, but I think we should go ahead and cut it off and let people go to their evenings. So thank you so much to our speakers. You guys have been great. This is super informative. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll send out the information to you guys, including the link to the recording on Monday. So thanks a lot.
Excuse me, Carol. Excuse me, Carol.
Yeah.
Carol, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I did see one comment in the chats going by that someone on the phone is thinking about running. And if you are thinking about running, I'd be happy to help in terms